Hey everyone, welcome back to the DTVC Extra podcast. In this episode, we're going to be looking at Thunderbolts. The movie just came out. So, surprise for me that I saw a movie so soon after it came out. I mean, I was doing the math, and I think because, the movie comes out right midnight on Thursday, which is technically Friday morning. And I saw it Saturday morning at like 9:30, 10-ish, right, by the time the trailers were done and all of that. And actually, the other thing is it was the first showing at the Cinemark Theater in University City, which is near University of Penn in Philadelphia. I hadn't been to that theater in over 10 years when my wife Jen and I went with some of my friends to go see the Riff Tracks like live Sharknado 2, which was really fun. But that was my last time going there. Apparently the crew from the night before didn't do any cleaning of the theaters, and so when I came in for that 9:30 showing, they were like frantically trying to clean it, and they did a good job. It seemed clean enough when I was sitting in there, but yeah, so it was a little bit delayed watching. The other thing was nobody turned the lights down when the movie started, right? So you get like that Marvel opening, the logo and the Marvel Studios and all of that, and the lights were still on. Usually that's when the lights turn down, and they just never turned them down. Somebody got up and got somebody, and they ended up turning the lights down, fortunately. But so it was an interesting experience. But it was roughly 34 hours after the film came out, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a movie that soon after it came out. I mean, with Deadpool and Wolverine, I think that movie had been out for a week or two when I saw that one finally. So this was kind of a big deal. It was one of those deals where I had a gift certificate from Fandango, my sister Megan, and brother-in-law Neil. They had gotten me a gift card, I think a couple of years ago. It shows you how often I go to the movie theater, that I still had it and I could still use it. So that worked out well too. But yeah, 9:30 in the morning is a good time to have soda and popcorn for breakfast, right? It works out really well. So, but I figured, I enjoyed the movie. I figured let's do a quick, DTVC Extra solo pod on it, just to kind of, get some of my thoughts out there. I know some people do videos. I know people do kind of different things when it comes to this kind of thing. For me, it seems like the solo pod is the way for me to kind of get my ramblings out when it comes to a movie. But I think it seemed like this was a movie that a lot of people took to. And so with that in mind, I thought it also could be kind of fun to kind of give my thoughts and see kind of, how they squared with other people. Because, that movie, there was about 10 people in the theater, and it seemed like everybody liked it. So 10 people seems pretty big for a 9:30 a.m. Saturday morning matinee. Most people are still sleeping at that time. So, or they've got kids, so they've been up since 6 and want to go back to bed. So to have the luxury of just being able to go and watch the movie, that was a good deal for me. But yeah, so I figure what we'll do before I get too far in on the movie, why don't we'll kind of break it into two spots. So this first half, I'm going to kind of get into sort of the history of Thunderbolts, which is a history that I wasn't that familiar with, but history of some of these characters and also sort of their progressions with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then the second part, we'll get in on the movie. So that way, if you haven't seen the movie yet, if you want to listen to some of this early stuff, you can, but you've got a good enough buffer for when the spoilers start to come. Probably put an ad for my newest book, Nadia and Aiden, in the middle there as well, so you can be treated to that. And hopefully go over to the podcast description, click on the link, and buy a copy, because that's always a nice thing as well. But yeah, why don't we get a little bit stuck in here, at least on the history of Thunderbolts. So the thing with the Thunderbolts, that was a comic book team, etc., that came out after I had stopped collecting. So I believe, according to Wikipedia, it looks like 97 is when they first come out. And so I, of course, I stopped collecting probably in the early to mid 90s. I was still kind of collecting when Superman died, but not really, at that point. And then I had kind of a brief spell when I got out of college and I had a little bit of money that I bought Deadpool and Cable comic books, because I was just kind of interested in I think once you get bit by that comic bug, it never fully goes away, even though you kind of grow out of it and maybe you're not going to the comic store all the time. Though when I went to one here in Philly recently. It was actually, I say recently, it was a couple of years ago. There's definitely older people there. There weren't many younger people. It was definitely, and people older than me, I would say too, people in their 60s and 70s who were going and picking things up. So yeah, I think it's, once you get the comic book thing in you, it never quite goes away. And it's one of the interesting things as we've been talking about these Marvel Cinematic Universe projects, because I had kind of skipped a lot of that. I'd seen some of the earlier phase stuff, but I'd skipped a lot of them. And so this exercise of going through them all and watching them all has been kind of fun, to kind of go back to my old comic book collecting and my old comic book fandom and kind of see how it's sort of played out here in some of these movies. So, but yeah, so Thunderbolts, it comes out in 97, and it was listed as kind of one of the best comic book twists of all time, because essentially it's after the Onslaught storyline, where I think Onslaught, if I've got this correct, right, he's sort of the essence or the brains or whatever of Professor Xavier and Magneto put together. That's how they make Onslaught. So again, that's another storyline that came out after I'd stopped collecting, but it was a major crossover event. The Avengers are killed off at the end, or they seemingly are. The Fantastic Four is gone, and so this new team of heroes emerges, the Thunderbolts, and it seems like it's exactly what the world needs. And then big plot twist at the end. It turns out it's just Baron Zemo and his Masters of Evil are there, and that's what it was. Now there's some twists that come after that like some of the baddies actually liked being heroes. Some of them weren't baddies; they were heroes who were duped into doing it. But that's essentially what happens, and then they start kind of coming up with new casts. And I know also too, after I'd stopped collecting, X-Force had changed from being like Cable with the New Mutants to kind of more of like this like team of like mutant assassins. So like, Wolverine, Deadpool, Psylocke, they would kind of go out and do things that were kind of a little bit more anti-hero than hero. And I think Joe Quesada had said maybe he wanted Thunderbolts to be more of that. And that is eventually what Thunderbolts becomes. So, there's this sort of this reductive concept that they're just the Marvel version of the Suicide Squad. And some of that kind of squares a little bit, but it's more of an anti-hero kind of thing as opposed to being bad guys that are forced by another, bad person to do heroic things. Like some of the different iterations of the Thunderbolts that I was reading about, you'd have like maybe like Deadpool and Punisher and Venom, all the kind of the coolest characters, right, in Marvel's universe. And so it definitely opens the door for them to do a lot of different things when they decided to make this comic book. But yeah, with the different characters that were in this as well, it was an interesting thing, because I think that one of the fears about this movie was that, how many of these characters really resonated with people, because they aren't some of the bigger names. When I was looking at the characters, I think only 3 of them were in the Marvel universe, technically 4 if you count Bucky, in the Marvel universe or in the comic books before I stopped collecting. So I think the first one that comes to mind right away is U.S. Agent, who my friends and I always called USA Gent. So if you hear me say USA Gent, it's because I 30 years later, I still haven't quite gotten that way of saying it out of my head. But one of the things I didn't know, and I kind of forgot, actually, I shouldn't say I didn't know, I forgot that at the time, especially when he was filling in for Captain America in the late 80s, when his first appearance was like in 86, and as he was sort of being Captain America at that time, there were actually people who were writing saying they liked him better than Captain America, and they didn't want to see Captain America come back. And that was because, again, he had more of that edge, more of that anti-hero vibe that we've been talking about as a theme for the late 80s with Marvel, that those were the characters that were the most successful, right? That you talk about Daredevil, right? We talked about in the last DTVC Extra episode, and how successful Daredevil was. We also talk about Wolverine being more popular, Venom becoming more popular, Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man run. So characters like the Punisher, and then of course Deadpool is invented in this environment, and he becomes one of the most popular characters. And so U.S. Agent was kind of similar to that in there. And I do remember when you'd see him show up in Captain America comics, that there was a sense of like, oh, that's a Captain America comic I need to buy. Now, the other thing, of course, at the time that I was collecting, in the late 80s and the early 90s, 91 was Captain America's 50th anniversary. So that was another big thing, right? Was that they were really pushing Captain America and that 50th anniversary. So they wanted to get him back and kind of have U.S. Agent be his own thing at that time. But that was something, until I'd read the Wikipedia about him, I had kind of forgotten that we had that kind of that feeling towards U.S. Agent, or U.S. Agent, as my friends and I called him. But we actually liked that character and thought he was kind of cool. So that's one character that had existed before, that I remembered from my time collecting comics. The other one, of course, is Taskmaster. And, what I remember about Taskmaster, one, of course, comic books were like only really like 2 fandoms removed from Masters of the Universe and He-Man for me, right? So you think like, Star Wars figures, right? And then He-Man, and of course G.I. Joe kind of bled into those. I was those 2, and then after He-Man, it was Ninja Turtles, and then Ninja Turtles wasn't long before comic books took over, and that was kind of the big one. So I still kind of had that feeling of like love, Skeletor being cool, all that kind of thing. So to have Taskmaster be a character who kind of looks like Skeletor, and I'm sure probably Skeletor was patterned a bit on Taskmaster when they were creating, because when they created the He-Man, figures and all of those characters, they were pulling from all kinds of different places, and just like throwing things, whatever worked, that kind of thing. But the thing I always remembered about Taskmaster is he would come in a lot of times before a big story arc. Right, so like you'd have like maybe like Spider-Man, or I think even Daredevil, I can't remember, but like Captain America, somebody like that. Taskmaster would show up and fight, and that would be however many panels or pages of that fight. But the thing was that it was never Taskmaster who was the big baddie, right? It was who had hired Taskmaster to fight this person and what was the purpose. And a lot of times it might have been to distract the hero while the big baddie, whoever that was, it was Kingpin or, Dr. Octopus or whoever it was that was doing the big bad stuff, right? They would maybe distract the hero while they were pulling off their big plans. That was a lot of times how Taskmaster would come in, but he was kind of this fun novelty of a baddie, that idea that he could use everybody's skills, so he's always difficult for the heroes to deal with. It wasn't like they couldn't beat him, but it was always like he's kind of more of a pain in the ass character than anything, but always kind of fun. And so, we'll get into a little bit about her cinematic, the cinematic depiction, because again, this character was Tony Masters. It's now Antonia, not Masters. I can't remember what the Russian name that they gave her in Black Widow, and then in this movie. But but that was another fun. Taskmaster. He's probably other than U.S. Agent, he's probably the one I would recognize the most, right, from being in the comics. And then you had Ghost, who I kind of remembered Ghost as an Iron Man villain when I collected. I didn't really collect Iron Man comics, so I wouldn't have really seen Ghost that much. And of course, that character was also a he. No, I guess if I would have seen Ghost, it probably would have been in other books because, again, they shared a lot of baddies together at that time. So I vaguely remembered Ghost, remember that concept a little bit. So when they introduced her in Ant-Man and Wasp, I kind of remembered the idea of that character, but not as well as I would have remembered U.S. Agent and Taskmaster. And then Bucky, I of course came in after the Winter Soldier storyline was well after me. So when I collected, I remember there's a set of Marvel trading cards. It might have been like Series 2 that had a section of cards called the Legends, and it was just characters who had been killed. And Bucky was one of them. I think maybe Kraven had been killed at that time. He might have been one of the other ones, but Bucky was there, right? They're showing him as somebody who had been killed, and it was a second Bucky that Captain America had that became Nomad, right? And so I remember Nomad, and Nomad had his own book at that time that was pretty much on the way out. I remember one of the last issues had Deadpool in it, so of course me and my friends had to buy that, right? We had to get that. But the original Bucky had been dead, right, as far as we knew. And then in '05, they introduced the Winter Soldier storyline, which then becomes, when Marvel Cinematic Universe becomes probably my favorite MCU movie. Captain America: Winter Soldier. I just love that movie. Just that one, and I think I like it a little bit better than Black Panther, which is another one of my favorites. But but that was that was a character that didn't exist right when I was collecting. So it was like '05 when they start that storyline. So he's one of the characters that comes later. When the main character in this, Yelena Belova, who was played by Florence Pugh. That character also came, I think, like late '90s. They invented that character, and so I used to play this video game, Marvel Puzzle Quest. Or I still play it. I shouldn't say I used to. I still play it. And she was one of the early characters when I played that game. So I think by the time I was playing the game, that game, in the 2010s, she had been an established character at that point. But again, I think that's part of the deal with Black Widow is that she really wasn't a well-developed character until sort of later on, and that was part of it, was that her main nemesis was invented or created later on. And speaking of which, we have the Red Guardian character. I kind of remember him. I know he exists before him. One of the things about his character was that he was supposed to have been married to Black Widow, because if you think about it, like those characters were existing in the '60s, so they would have been old enough to be doing World War II stuff, or maybe just after World War II stuff, but they would have made more sense. And so he was a character that I think I remember seeing, I don't remember him actually being in any comics, but sometimes with the collecting of the cards and things like that, he would be a character that might be included. So I kind of knew of him, but not a character that I really would have known really well. And then, of course, right, we've got the Sentry. The Sentry character is one that also came after I collected. I think he's like late '90s, early 2000s. He's a character that I had heard of. I knew about him, but again, this was kind of a new character for me as well. So it was interesting watching, going into this with not a lot of history. Now, I did do my, as the kids would call it, my Marvel homework beforehand. So I watched Falcon and Winter Soldier. I was kind of catching up on, I'm still kind of catching up on that Phase 4. So I did WandaVision and figured I'd do Falcon and Winter Soldier. And then I skipped ahead and did Black Widow because I hadn't done that one yet either. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that would have counted for what they call homework that you'd have to do beforehand. I mean, I guess there's Captain America, Winter Soldier. That's something that yes, Ant-Man and Wasp, right? Ant-Man and Wasp is another one that, because it introduces Ghost, which I had seen. I've seen that one as well. Because remember when we were doing the Phase 3, I picked that one up there. But yeah, I mean, that concept of Marvel homework is an interesting one, right? Because I've thought about it a little bit, because I mentioned it before, because I was telling people that the one movie you really have to see for your Marvel homework is Black Widow. The rest of them they're kind of good to have. But I was talking with Freddie Young about this, how when we collected comics, it was very different from homework. It was more like when you would read a comic that would reference something in a previous issue, like a back issue of some sort. It was less about the fact that I'm going to stop reading this and go find this back issue and read this first. It was more like it sold us to want to go to the comic book shop and start digging through the crates of back issues to kind of find that one. Those would be ones you'd put on your list to kind of read and want to check out later. And it is interesting, the Marvel movies kind of feel the other way around, that if you don't watch the previous stuff, you feel like you're missing something, or you're not getting the full story. And it was something that I learned, I saw the Marvels when that one came out, and I hadn't seen any of I hadn't seen the Ms. Marvel, and I hadn't seen WandaVision at that point. I had just seen Captain Marvel. And I remember, there was that whole thing about Marvel homework. And I think the biggest thing about that invention of that term Marvel homework and how it was being used, and it was mostly just bro chauvinist types who didn't want to say out loud, I don't want to watch a movie that's led by 3 chicks, and especially a diverse group of chicks. I don't want to watch that. And I think I would respect them more if they did that. Just go online and say that. But of course, you probably lose your job and things like that for that. But so they have to pretend they're not chauvinists when they are. And this was their way of saying, I don't want to watch this movie. And the reason why I don't want to watch this movie is because I'm a chauvinist, and I'm probably also racist, at least somewhat racist. That's the reason I don't want to do it. But I'm going to say it's because I hadn't watched the other shows first. Which, why didn't you watch those other shows first? Maybe because you're also a chauvinist and racist. But that's I remember TV's Frank, I've told this joke, but he said, it's not like people weren't watching McHale's Navy Goes to the Air Force because they hadn't seen all the McHale's Navy episodes. And so I joked back that, it's also because Darren McGavin was in, or Gavin McLeod. I get those names mixed up. But Gavin McLeod was in McHale's Navy Goes to the Air Force. That's why everybody went out and saw that movie. But anyway, so this concept of Marvel homework is born more from people just not wanting to admit that they don't want to go see a movie because of their own hang-ups, right? But I think there's a real concept of Marvel homework that has kind of hurt some of these projects or some of these Marvel films in recent years. And I think it's a different concept altogether than what we think of as homework, right? We think of the term homework as adults now as stuff you need to do beforehand to get up to speed on stuff. But think about it instead from the standpoint of bringing your work home with you, right? Or it's not important enough that you need to do it right away. You can get to it whenever. And I think that's really where it's become a homework. I think during the pandemic, with the rise of Disney Plus and the Disney TV shows, yes, with WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier, those shows were really good, and they were still coming off that big run of the Infinity War movies and those 2 big Avengers movies. And so because that shine was still there and that momentum was still there, and people were looking for content during the pandemic, it was like, okay, yeah, let's watch these. This is a lot of fun, and they kind of kept up with it. But then I think it started to creep in a bit with their core audience, right? That group that I refer to as young millennials. They're kind of born late 80s, early 90s, who were a big part of the Marvel cinematic universe, driving the momentum on those films. And granted, all age groups like those Marvel movies, but I think that group in particular, for them, it became less about I think there was less impetus to keep up with everything so quickly, because with the movie being in the theater, if you knew it was going to be on Disney Plus not long after, you might wait on it. And then with the TV shows, there was a sense too of initially, yes, we're going to keep up with every episode. We're going to watch every episode when it comes out. And then it's oh, you miss an episode. And you think, well, it's okay. I'll just watch that other episode later, right? Because it's not like it was with linear TV, where if you missed an episode, you were behind. You wouldn't be able to catch that episode again until maybe summer reruns, if they were running summer reruns and they weren't replacing it with some other summer call-up show. But now, it's with everything being available on Disney Plus, there isn't the impetus to keep up with everything, unless it's one of those deals of oh, I just want to know because everybody else knows I want to be a part of the conversation. And that stuff starts to pile up. And I think that did have an effect on the Marvels somewhat, because I think with these shows and these things piling up and people not being able to keep up with them, I think I think they, I don't want to say, I think it's affected some of these movies that people, they're like, I want to make sure I catch up with everything before I go see them. And you could say like, okay, well, Marvel had what, like 23 movies in the first three phases. That seems like a lot to keep up on. But it's like a movie every few months. You're kind of making it a point to get out to see a movie every few months. And again, you had to go see those movies because you didn't know when they would be on any kind of streamer. You didn't know when they'd be available. If they were available at home movies, you'd be getting them on DVD or something. And even then, you'd probably be thinking like, well, the DVD that I get is not going to be as nice as seeing it in the theater. Again, that's another part of this, right? Is that streaming can look really nice on your TV. So you've got all of these different elements that are playing into this whole Marvel homework thing that I think has hurt Disney's brand a little bit, because there isn't always this impetus to get out and see these movies right away. I think Deadpool and Wolverine definitely created that vibe of, hey, everybody get out and see this movie. It seems like Captain America Brave New World didn't do that. And I don't even know to what extent Daredevil Born Again did. I mean, I really enjoyed it. The podcast, the solo podcast that we did here, people really enjoyed that as well. It definitely got a lot of love. But I don't know how many people were like, oh, I've got to see Born Again. I got to catch every episode right away. Even I wasn't doing it. I would miss a couple weeks and then catch up and watch them that way. So I think that's kind of the real Marvel homework. It's not that that people feel like they have to. But well, I should say, okay, people do feel like they have to watch everything. Because I also realized when I was doing Marvel Phase 3 that like I would have missed a lot. I did miss a lot when I watched those movies out of order the first time. I mean, I missed a lot from the first, Avengers of Infinity War from not having seen Captain America Civil War. And I think for those younger people, they would have already known that going in, that like, oh boy, I don't know if I want to watch this without having seen these other things before, because I want to get everything. I want to understand everything. I want to know all the inside jokes. I want to catch all of that stuff. And for them, it wasn't about homework as like, I've got to watch all these things to see this movie. It was like, I want to watch all these things to see these movies, but I'll get to it at some point, right? Because it's always going to be there on Disney Plus, and there's no real need for me to do it. I think the other thing too the pandemic did for that age cohort in particular is that, and I don't know, again, when you we're talking about bell curves. We're not talking about everybody in a generation or in an age cohort is the same. But I think those age cohorts skew a little bit more, what do I want to say? Not antisocial, but more introverted, right? Those groups skew more introverted. Same with like the Gen X. That's another one that we talk about. Or sorry, Gen Z. And again, we're talking more of a bell curve or skewing in that direction. Because like for example, my nephew, he's definitely Gen Z. He's 18. He was out canvassing for candidates during the 2024 election period. So, I mean, I'm way more introverted than that, right? I'm not going knocking on people's doors to try to get them to vote for candidates. I'm not even calling people. I mean, again, I'm born in 1979. For me, the one app on my iPhone that I hate the most is the app that makes it a phone, right? I don't want to be talking to anybody on the phone. I don't want to do any of that stuff. So, but again, I think my age cohort probably skews a little bit less introverted, and I think it's that some of these other generations skew a little bit more. And so again, when you're saying you're going to give them an option to not have to go out and go see movies, I think a lot of those people are going to take it and say, yeah, you know what? I don't really feel like dealing with people today. I'm just going to wait until this thing comes out on Disney Plus in a few months. And so I know we're close probably right now to Captain America Brave New World. And I think that's one of the things that happens to it. So, and I think, for me saying like what Marvel homework you need to watch to be able to see a movie, again, I think for that age cohort, that late 80s, early 90s age cohort, for them, it doesn't even matter, right? If I say, well, you could get by without having seen Falcon and Winter Soldier and Ant-Man and Wasp, right? You wouldn't need those for this movie. For them, it would be like, no, I want to know their first appearance. I want to know all of this stuff beforehand. It wouldn't be a question of going in not knowing. And so I think that is one of the things that is kind of hurting Disney's brand. It's not so much that there's so much content out there. I mean, I think that's part of it. But I think the bigger piece is the fact that all the content is just available. It's just warehoused on Disney Plus, and you can watch it whenever you want. I mean, that's kind of how I've been with Phase 4. It's like I'll get to these movies when I get to them. I'll get to these TV shows when I get to them, and I'm starting to kind of crack in on them now. But I was also catching up on the previous first three phases where I hadn't seen movies, and again, they're all just available on Disney Plus where I can watch them whenever. So. But it's an interesting thing. It's going to be interesting to see how this concept of Marvel homework, right? How it affects things going forward. And I think it's still always going to be an excuse for people that have hang-ups to use coded language to describe why they don't want to go see a Marvel movie, when the real reason is they're just a chauvinist or racist or a combination of the two. So that's always going to be a part of it as well. But maybe we should get in on some of how these characters come to be in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I was trying to think who the first one was. I think the first one is probably Winter Soldier, right? Sebastian Stan's Bucky Barnes. And we see him, right? The first time we see him is in in Captain America First Avenger, where he's Bucky, and he goes to war, and then he dies in that movie. Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Captain America First Avenger. And so then you get Captain America Winter Soldier, which for me, I think it's my favorite of the MCU movies. It's one of my top 5 favorite comic book movies ever. I just it's right up there with things that I really love, like Batman Returns and Superman and Dolph Lundgren's Punisher. It's right in that ballpark for me. I mean, it's just a straight up like spy action thriller with, obviously Spiro Rosatos is action directing. So much of it just really works. It's like, I always think of it as like what's the Daniel Craig James Bond was trying to sell itself as to us. The Captain America Winter Soldier fully realized that and just made it great. I mean, again, other performances. I loved Anthony Mackie in it, loved Scarlett Johansson. Just all around fantastic movie. And I think the momentum from that movie, introducing us to Mackie and Sebastian Stan, but I think in particular that Winter Soldier character really resonated with a lot of people, and they just really wanted to see him in more stuff. And so again, of course, we get him in Captain America: Civil War, where we also get Mackie again. And then I think like the big one, right, where they really get fleshed out is Falcon and Winter Soldier. So it's was supposed to be the first TV show of Marvel's Phase 4 and their foray into the Disney Plus world. But I guess due to some delays, I think from COVID, they had to flip it and put WandaVision first and then Falcon and Winter Soldier second. I don't know that it's as good. I don't know how you compare that one in WandaVision, but I think the one thing that people forget when they talk about sort of this decline from Marvel is that Falcon and Winter Soldier and WandaVision were both really good TV shows, and they did really well. So it was like they were still doing well at that point. Loki, I think, was another one. I think when we get into Black Widow, we can talk about when things start to kind of maybe dip a little bit for them. But they were still doing well. They were still putting out really good content at that time. And WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier, I think Falcon and Winter Soldier less so than WandaVision, but they were still kind of these, trending Twitter topic, cultural phenomena kind of things where everybody was talking about them online. And so in that series, yes, more of that series was about getting us ready for Anthony Mackie as Captain America, which I think they do a really great job with. Again, this is also where we get introduced to U.S. Agent. And I think that's part of the thing with U.S. Agent is that they really would need to make him look like a jerk because they want us to want Anthony Mackie as Captain America, which I think they do a really great job of that as well. But again, it kind of hurts U.S. Agent because that's not who he is in the comics, right? He's a cool anti-hero in the comics, and here he's just like this complete jerk-off that people don't want to spend a lot of time with. Yeah, and I kind of realized as I was having this talk about Winter Soldier that it kind of bled into a U.S. Agent conversation as well when I kind of jumped ahead to Falcon and Winter Soldier. So maybe let me backtrack a little bit here to Ant-Man and Wasp, because that's where we get introduced to Ghost. And that was an interesting movie because, I've talked about this when I was talking about Marvel Phase 3, that movie comes out in that window between Infinity War and Endgame that really was one of that kind of that rising tide that rose a whole bunch of boats. The only one we talked about at that time that didn't get risen, if that's the way to say it, was the second Deadpool movie, because it came out too soon after Infinity War and it kind of was swallowed up. Like the early part of it was swallowed up. It still does really well though. I think it was still the first or second highest grossing Fox X movie. So it still does well, but I think had it come out like maybe like a month later than it did, it probably would have pulled like another 150, maybe 200 million, which is that's not insignificant. But I kind of think that was the case because the other ones, there's a lot of movies that weren't as good as that one that did really well. The Venom movie does well. Aquaman is the only billion-dollar earner for the DC Extended Universe. And of course, this Ant-Man and Wasp movie, I should say also Captain Marvel did over $1 billion. I think kind of maybe giving Marvel a false idea of how well a Captain Marvel-led movie could do. I think the movie itself was probably maybe more like an $800 million range, but again, it got that boost, and so I think that's what they thought they could do, that kind of movie with the Marvels and have it be as successful. Again, I don't think that movie needed to be so unsuccessful because it was a fun movie. I was like, as Mitch from the Video Vacuum termed it, it was a fun space romp. But I think for a $220 million budget, which if you go on Wikipedia, some chauvinistic jamokes, brosphere guys tweaked the budget, so it says $375 million. That movie did not cost $375 million to make. I think IMDb has it set at like 220. That's probably more accurate, 220 maybe to 250. But when you spend 220 to 250 on a movie, right, you don't want a fun space romp. It's got to be like kind of this transcendent thing that gets 750 to $1 billion worth of gate there, and yeah, that movie wasn't that kind of movie, right? It was just it was a fun space romp that's gonna, again, I don't know that it's 200 million. It's probably more like 400 or 500 million. Is probably what it should have done. But anyway, sorry, I'm kind of getting off track there, talking about Captain Marvel. But again, that's that window in there, and Ant-Man and Wasp is in that window. And again, I think it gave Marvel a false sense of like what you could do with Ant-Man, because that movie makes like 650 million, and that's by far, it's like a good 200 million more than either of the other Ant-Man movies. But that movie does introduce Ghost. We don't see her again until this movie, so we don't know what's going on with her. She just kind of disappears. But I think there was a sense of like, when they were creating the Thunderbolts, when they're putting together like the team, who they were going to use, and they're like, well, what are some people that, one, some people that are available, and two, people that we've kind of introduced before as baddies that could fit this mold of like anti-hero more than baddie, and Ghost came up. And I think also too, the star of the film, Hannah John Kamen, had said that she was interested in reprising the role, so that made it easier for them, right, when they were deciding who to bring back. And so, but again, it's been like 7 years since that movie came out, so it is an interesting thing that, in a way, I wonder if part of the reason why they chose her character for this is because it may have limited the amount of what we were talking about, right, Marvel homework that people had to do. Most people saw Ant-Man and Wasp back during, in that period between the two Infinity War movies. And so that's a movie they wouldn't have had to worry about. I think when you look at kind of all of these characters, most of them would have been caught up on this quote Marvel homework, because most of the stuff is like, for example, almost all of the Winter Soldier stuff, that's all from the previous three phases except for Falcon and Winter Soldier. So probably helped in that sense, right? That you didn't have a lot of people probably didn't have a lot that they had to watch. But I don't know, maybe just an idea. But I think part of it also was, again, who they could get to play those roles. So we've got Winter Soldier, right? We've got Ghost, and we mentioned U.S. Agent, who is in Falcon Winter Soldier, and again, he's kind of a different U.S. Agent compared to the one that we had in the comic books, because again, I think it was one thing to make U.S. Agent really cool in the 80s and have people write in and say, hey, we don't want you to bring back Steve Rogers as Captain America. It's something else entirely when you're passing the mantle on to Anthony Mackie and you want to make him Captain America. And I do think there was probably a sense of like, it's not enough to just have Chris Evans hand him the shield at the end of Endgame and say, that's it, we're passing on the torch. And I think they did a really great job in Falcon and Winter Soldier of playing that whole piece out of Anthony Mackie being conflicted. Why would I want to be Captain America? I don't, the reasons why he wouldn't take the mantle for both personal and more greater cultural reasons. I think they dealt with issues of race in America in a different way than they were dealt with in Black Panther, but also in a very powerful way. And I think in a way that was really effective. And so, yeah, but I think the casualty to that, right, of course, was that U.S. Agent really had to be kind of a jerk, because you couldn't have any kind of gray area there where you think, yeah, maybe we will like to see him, take on the mantle. And again, with that same kind of, I don't want to say they should be placating or they should be worried about the chauvinists, but, I'm sure, though, not the chauvinists, but the racists in this case, right? The racists are going to probably be more, out, and I think there was probably some sentiment about that. There's always going to be, right, with that kind of thing. But I do also feel like for people that were questioning whether Anthony Mackie should be Captain America, Falcon and Winter Soldier really clears that up, right? Makes that one really good. Okay, so then we've got Black Widow. And I think out of the movies, the things that you have to watch going into this film, I think Black Widow is the one must, because there's just no way you could fully understand the relationship between Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova and David Harbour's Red Guardian character. That relationship doesn't make any sense if you don't see the movie ahead of time and see how that's all established there. The interesting thing about that movie, I mean, there's a few things with that movie that I found interesting watching it going into Thunderbolts. It was supposed to be finally like Marvel is giving Scarlett Johansson her movie, her Black Widow movie. The funny thing is, of course, one, her character had died going into the movie, right? So we knew this was going to be a flashback. It was kind of it takes place like before the events of Infinity War. It's kind of between Civil War and Infinity Wars where it takes place. But because they're introducing us to Florence Pugh's character and David Harbour's character and Rachel Weisz's character, and they're kind of making a big deal about having them all in the movie, we lose Scarlett Johansson at certain points. And I think that like when we get to the very end where she's going up against Ray Winstone, it's almost like a reminder of like, oh wait, this is her movie, right? This is supposed to be her movie. Like everybody else, what they're doing is supposed to be secondary, right? She's the one who's supposed to have this final confrontation with the baddie. She's the one who's supposed to be doing all of this stuff. We kind of lose her a bit, so it's interesting for her one movie that. We don't get as much of her as we should. It's kind of overall interesting what they did with that character because she was such a strong part of the first three phases of the MCU. The killing her off was weird, just like it was weird when they killed off Gamora. That was just a hokey construct that I think they wrote themselves into a corner with. The whole getting the what was it? The Soul Stone, I guess, was the one where you had to kill somebody, a soul for a soul, is what they said. They wrote themselves in a corner with that, and I think even if Scarlett Johansson wanted to be done with the series, right? She just wanted to make her one movie, and then she was done, and so killing her off was like the way to do that. I don't know. I think there could be other ways they could have done it. The other thing is that Freddie Young, Full Moon Reviews, when he was on, we were talking about Invasion USA, which you can check out now on the podcast in the feed. He was saying that actually the plan was to kill Captain America off there. He was going to sacrifice himself there. And then they decided not to because I think they really needed to have that sequence where Captain America and Iron Man go back in time and sort of have the mission together because there was always that friction between those two, and I think to have the team up between them was a really fun moment to do at the end. So that meant they couldn't kill him off, right? So then it's like, okay, well, who are we going to kill off next? Well, for whatever reason, they like to kill off women characters more. It just seems like in some cases here that's like, okay, Scarlett Johansson's Black Widow character, for whatever reason, she kind of got the short end of the stick on that one, which is kind of a shame because I think we could have had some really fun, adventurous movies between the two of them. By the same token, when we get into Thunderbolts here coming up in just a few minutes, there are elements of Yelena Belova's sort of trauma that she goes through that wouldn't come out quite as good if we don't lose Scarlett Johansson. So, yeah, it's interesting. There's a book that I remember reading. I don't want to tell you the name of the book because I feel like I'll be giving away a huge piece of the book. And if you ever decide to read it, But anyway, it's this book about this character who it was written at kind of the turn of the century, United States, and this character, she gets pregnant by it's like a senator, I guess, and she has a baby out of wedlock, and it kind of puts her life in this odd, sort of liminal space in society. But then this rich guy takes her in, but he can't really marry her because his family won't let her do that or whatever. So eventually he leaves her and does marry somebody else, and so. You think, okay, well, it's okay. She's there living with her daughter. Her daughter was now I think a teenager at this point, so they were almost kind of companions for each other. And then the daughter gets typhoid fever and dies, and it was kind of like a huge shock. Like, oh, why are you doing this? Why are you putting this poor woman through the ringer? But what it is that when the male character, the boyfriend, dies off at the end of the movie, and she's not able to go be a part of the funeral, be a part of any of the services or anything like that, and we kind of see her. Just describing the book, kind of watching from behind the chain link fence and seeing it happen. It's kind of like, okay, it makes sense because if she had the daughter, the boyfriend dying wouldn't have mattered as much because she would have always had her daughter, right? She wouldn't have been alone. And I guess that's kind of the thing, right? Is if we don't kill off Scarlett Johansson, there's a lot of what Yelena Belova goes through that wouldn't be so bad if she could just call Scarlett Johansson and hang out with her, right? Like she just reconnected with her sister. We get that moment in Hawkeye where she's telling what's his name Hawkeye, right? Why am I drawing a blank on Hawkeye? Clint Barton, I guess we call him, right? But she's telling Hawkeye, you got so much more time with her than I did, and so it's sad because you we could have had so many great movies with the two of them, maybe doing some kind of espionage action adventures. But yeah, I don't know if Thunderbolts ends up being as good of a movie if none of that happens. So I guess it's one of those things. It's kind of like when Mitch and I recently we just recorded on Space Mutiny, which is an upcoming episode we'll be having, and we were talking about him being Captain America, and we were saying like, I wonder if he got picked up, if that show got picked up by CBS, if we wouldn't have had Space Mutiny, right? Because Red Brown would have been a bigger star, it wouldn't have been doing stuff like that. So I don't know if it's fair to Red Brown to say, yeah, no Captain America because we really need that Space Mutiny. But anyway, and I don't even know if that's a good comp. It's just one of the. I don't know if I'm making the wrong comp there. But anyway. I'm a little bit over time. I was thinking I was going to try to do this in 30 minutes. It's now 39 minutes. So why don't we take a break here? We've done enough of the backstory on the characters here. We've done enough on their histories. We'll take a break here, and when we come back, we will pick up with talking about the movie Thunderbolts. Check out my newest release, Nadia and Aiden, available now. Told in a unique, dual first-person narration style, Nadia and Aiden explores what it means to be American from the standpoint of two kids who grew up in France with an American mother. It also looks at how we define family beyond DNA and blood relations, when life isn't always that simple. You can find Nadia and Aiden on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and Kindle Unlimited. The link is in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and we're going to get stuck in here on the Thunderbolts. But before we do, I want to make another spoiler warning here because there's really no way I can talk about this movie without giving things away. So just keep that in mind. Based on how successful this has been, it's now the second weekend the movie's been out, and I think it's going to be the number one movie again this weekend. Probably a lot of people have seen it, but a lot of people probably haven't. And if you're listening to this and you're one of those people who haven't seen it, go see it first before you listen to this because, again, I'm going to be spoiling all kinds of stuff. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, in terms of this movie, I think 2022, they were already kind of thinking about making the film. So they start kind of drafting up the script, the idea of maybe having Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova be the lead character, but also bringing back people like Ghost, people who were interested, people, actors that they could add, obviously Bucky, Sebastian Stan's Winter Soldier, characters like that. That was kind of the idea that they had. And they had a script pretty much fleshed out in 2023, and they had a couple names attached to it. So, for example, they had Steven Yeun from Walking Dead. He was going to play the Sentry. Ayo Idabiri from The Bear. She was also going to be, and she was going to play the character of Mel, who is Valentina de Fontaine's assistant. But then the writer's strike happens first. Now, they had most of the movie written that they thought they could maybe they could start shooting, but then the actor's strike happens, right? So that kind of pushes the whole thing back and it all gets delayed. And then there's sort of this cascading effect with these delays that cause people to have to drop out. So, for example, Ayo Idabiri had to drop out. Steven Yeun had to drop out. So in their place, they get Geraldine Viswanathan. I probably should know that name. She was in the Drive-Away Dolls with Ethan Coen directing. Geraldine Viswanathan, maybe that's the best way to say it. And then Steven Yeun is replaced by Lewis Pullman. That's an easy one for me to say there. But anyway, so they had these replacements. Then of course they also trying to figure out when they were going to release it. They ended up originally it was going to be later this year, and Fantastic Four is going to be earlier. They swapped those two. So they kind of went forward with the cast that they had, and started scripting. There was other things too that they were going to have. For example, Kang the Conqueror was going to be a part of this because if you remember when they were developing it in 2022, 2023, they thought they were going to have Jonathan Majors, right? And then of course they lose him, have to kind of do away with the whole thing, right? The whole Kang the Conqueror thing. So there's none of that in this. But I think there were some other rewrites as they kind of decided to go in this direction of exploring mental health, which I think worked out really well. But yeah, so after some delays due to the writer strikes and Jonathan Majors and all these different things that kind of happened that caused those delays, they finally get the movie out. And yeah, I mean it does really well. And I have to say for myself, I really enjoyed it. There was a lot of stuff in it that I liked. I think Florence Pugh's performance is probably the best part of it, and I think that kind of anchors the whole thing. But I think there's some other parts of it that I thought were really good. So why don't we get in? I'll talk a little bit about the plot here, because I think the first piece of it that has to be covered is the fact that it is not just Marvel's Suicide Squad. And one of the interesting things is that originally James Gunn, when he did Guardians of the Galaxy, he expressed interest in doing the Thunderbolts. And then when he got the opportunity to do the Suicide Squad for DC, he thought, well, I don't want to do the Thunderbolts now because they're kind of the same. They're kind of similar, right? It's a similar concept. And I think Marvel was really conscious of that they knew what the Suicide Squad was and they didn't want to remake the Suicide Squad. But I think anybody that you see who's like critiquing this movie, who's not fans of it or whatever, and they try to reduce this into just being Marvel Suicide Squad, they probably didn't watch the movie. That's probably the best way I can describe it. They may have slept through it. I don't know, because this is not just Marvel Suicide Squad. They set it up like that, right? All the commercials make it seem like this is just going to be Marvel's Suicide Squad, right? The way that they advertise the film. Though the advertisements now are a little bit different from that, but originally the way that they advertised it was to make it look like that. And the reason why they do that is because they want to throw you off the scent of what the real plot is, so that when you go in, you're actually surprised by the things that happen in it. But yeah, so if you see anybody telling you, oh no, this is just Marvel's Suicide Squad, either they didn't watch the movie and they're just going based off the commercials, or they're saying they watched the movie and they're not telling the truth, or they just didn't get it. They just didn't get the movie, because it's not that. The basic premise is that you've got Yelena Belova. She's kind of going through a crisis of confidence. She is having mental health as she's going through depression as well, and she's kind of deciding she wants to get out of this life where she's just going around doing these assassinations for Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Desfontaine character, and so Dave Fontaine says, I'm going to give you one last job. Just do one last job for me, and then you'll be out. You'll go. So she gets the job to go to some like bunker location and kill Ghost, right? That's her target. When she gets there, she realizes that U.S. agent is there, and he's there to try to kill her. And then Taskmaster shows up, and Taskmaster's job is to kill U.S. agent. And then we find out that the Ghost job is to kill Taskmaster, and all the time there's Lewis Pullman just shows up and nurses scrubs. There's like, I don't know, some kind of like hospital gown kind of outfit. He's just there. Nobody knows why he's there or what he's doing. And then here's where kind of the first big moment happens. Taskmaster is killed. Ghost kills Taskmaster. Just puts a bullet right in her head, and I think this is kind of a fitting place to sort of take a break here and talk about, because you notice in the previous segment I didn't bring up Taskmaster. I don't know if you can hear the sirens in the background here. It's the perfect time of night here in Philadelphia. But anyway, I didn't bring up Taskmaster in the last segment when I was talking about people's first appearances in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I didn't do that for a reason. I think it's because the way Taskmaster was handled in Black Widow, to me, it borders on like, Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine territory, Typhoid Mary in the Elektra movie territory, where you're just not using a classic character in the right way. Now, the gender swap piece doesn't bother me. I would love to have had Olga Kurylenko as Antonia Masters, call her Tony Masters, right? And have her be the actual Taskmaster, right? Where not this thing who's like mind controlled, this person who's mind controlled by the baddie, who's been burned by almost being killed in an accident and all this kind of stuff. To me, it's hokey. It didn't work. It wasn't what I wanted from Taskmaster. And the fact that they kill her off right away, I mean, it's very much Drew Barrymore in Scream. It's Emilio Estevez in Mission Impossible, right? It's that kind of thing that's supposed to throw you off the scent, supposed to kind of make the movie a little bit harsher. And you're already getting thrown off the scent because you're finding out that this is not just Marvel Suicide Squad, right? But then it throws you off the scent more to kind of let you know that this is like a real deal, that these are some bad people who are sort of maybe looking for their moment of redemption or whatever. In a way, it was kind of a fitting way to do away with it, but by the same token, it just feels like such a wasted thing. The whole Taskmaster thing just feels like it was just a wasted concept for them. And maybe it's their way of, kind of going. I started watching Loki, so it's their way of maybe pruning their timeline. Or like, remember Deadpool in the second Deadpool movie where he takes the time travel device that Cable had and he goes around and he's like, clearing up the bad things that Fox did, like that version of of Deadpool that they had. But I don't, the Taskmaster thing was a fail on my part, for my mind. I think if you're going to cast someone like Olga Kurylenko, use Olga Kurylenko. She is one of the top women in action right now, period. She's one of the top figures in action, period. And, think of all the great movies that she's done and the great performances she's had, especially in a lot of the direct-to-video stuff with, people like Jesse V. Johnson. The fact that they wasted her the way they did, to me, it just was unnecessary, too. Like, I get it that they wanted to have sort of, in the Black Widow, they wanted to have some kind of connection to her character, like that she was almost killed by Black Widow, and then now she's back, and it's like, does she want revenge, or is it she's being mind controlled by the baddie who's her father? All that kind of stuff. I get that there was some kind of thing there, but don't do it with Taskmaster. Do it with somebody else. Make it a different character. Taskmaster should be his or her own thing. Again, I don't mind that they made it to a female Taskmaster compared to the character in the comics that's a male. I didn't care about that. And again, I would have wanted Olga Kurylenko there, but yeah, it's one of the few times that the Marvel Cinematic Universe went, Deadpool in X-Men's Origin Wolverine, right? It's one of those things that we were used to from comic book movies, that they would always make those kind of fugazi wrong moves. This was one of the few, I think, from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where they did that. So anyway, when she gets killed off, I was disappointed, because I really kind of wanted to see her to get some kind of redemption where she gets to be more of that real Taskmaster that we remember from the comics, and it felt like maybe she was getting a little bit of that to start with, but no, they just decided she was the one that they were going to kill off. So anyway, they kill her off, and then it's kind of this whole thing where they have to try to escape, and it's a long process for them to get to escape. So it's the three of them, Yelena Belova, Ghost, and U.S. Agent, and then Lewis Pullman, who's playing this guy. They just know of him as Bob, right? We kind of know where they're going with Bob, right? If you read anything about it, he's going to be the Sentry, and that's kind of the idea. So, they do escape, and then Bob kind of gets caught. Bob essentially lets himself get caught to try to save the rest of them, so they escape. And then, Yelena Belova's dad shows up, David Harbour's Red Guardian. He shows up to help them, and then eventually Bucky, is involved. At the same time, Julie Louis-Dreyfus, she's messing with the Sentinel. She's messing with his brain to try to manipulate him and control him. And, when the heroes show up to try to stop her and save Bob, of course, he's like, hey, I'm like a god now. And he defeats all of them very easily because the Sentry's all powerful. But then it turned out that Julie Louis-Dreyfus had Geraldine Viswanathan, I think I got it right there, Viswanathan, create a kill switch. Which he toggles the kill switch, though, it turns him into the Void, right? So that was like his alter ego in the comics, or his kind of his other half that would kill a lot of people. So, and of course, the Void goes on this spree of just sort of like turning people into black dust. So Yelena Belova allows herself to be turned into black dust, and then she kind of just goes through the different, kind of these different rooms to try to sort of convince Bob, to try to sort of stop being the Void or whatever. And I think one of the things I liked about it was, you've got this all-powerful baddie, right? And there's, how do you defeat them? And early on in the movie, it's established that, Lewis Pullman's Bob, or the Sentry character, is a loner. People don't really treat him well. He's not used to being treated well. But here, Yelena Belova, she takes, she kind of, protects him in some of the early scenes. She jokes around with him. She sort of makes a connection with him. I shouldn't say sort of. She makes a connection with him. And it kind of goes back to a Dangerous Place, which I covered on the PM podcast with John recently, John Cross, when we were talking about that, where there's a scene in that movie where, Marshall Teague is telling Ted Jan Roberts, don't show any mercy. And he's like, no, if you spare an enemy, they become your friend. And I think that's a kind of an important thing, right? Is that, all Bob's character wanted was, connection. He wanted to connect with a human being. And she offered that to him. And that meant a lot, that it ended up being sort of the piece that sort of started the process where they could, defeat the Void. And of course, also the other characters kind of get themselves sucked up into the Void as well, and kind of help him, escape as well. They kind of all join together and do that. And I thought that was kind of a really cool approach to it. In terms of the movie being like what kind of stars I would put on it, that kind of thing, 3 or 4 star. I mean, I think it's a good solid 3 star. I don't know if I'd go a little further than that. Kind of the end where it's like, oh, hey, they're the new Avengers. I think that was sort of how the process worked in the movies. So I kind of see how they were doing that, but it also was kind of hokey. It was like, they're getting ready to take out Julie Louis-Dreyfus, and they walk behind a curtain. Suddenly there's a whole camera crew there. So it's kind of weird as well. And they were hinting at a few things, like the fact that Anthony Mackie's Captain America wasn't happy that they were all calling themselves the Avengers. But they hinted at those things, right? They didn't really get into them too much. And then the other thing, of course, we get a post-credit sequence where we find out that the Fantastic Four has crossed dimensions to come visit them. And I guess maybe that's going to be teased for what's going to happen in the next movie. What that kind of tells me, right, if we're seeing this spaceship in the end of the Avengers movie that they were escaping, tells me that they probably couldn't figure out a way to defeat Galactus and they had to escape, which I remember from the comic books that Reed Richards created this thing called the Ultimate Nullifier, and that's what stopped Galactus, I think, if I'm right. The other thing, of course, too, right, was that Silver Surfer, which this is a different Silver Surfer in the movie. It's the character of Shalabal, who is Norrin Rad, the original Silver Surfer, his wife. The reason why I know that is if on Disney Plus they have the old Silver Surfer cartoon. I say old, it was from the 90s, but I watched it, and the entire time he's just talking about wanting to get back to his wife Shalabal. He's like, I need to find my way back to my Shalabal, and it just every 5 minutes. It's almost like with PM where you have to have an action sequence every 15 minutes. It's almost like with the Fox Silver Surfer cartoon. They're like, it's been 5 minutes. Has he mentioned Shalabal yet? I don't think so. So let's write in something where he mentions her. So that's how I know that. I do know that the chauvinists were up in arms that they were using the female Silver Surfer for this Fantastic Four movie, but again, she is a legitimate character in the comic books. And I also think too. I mean, if this is supposed to be an other dimensional Fantastic Four, maybe they want the Norrin Rad one to be used in the MCU universe. I don't know if that's an idea, but anyway, yeah, I was trying to think about like why this movie worked so well for me, and I think. Obviously, I mentioned before, Florence Pugh's performance, it was a big part of it. She just kind of holds the film together. I mean, there's just scenes that she has, especially some of her scenes with David Harbour, where she's just really emotional, kind of just gets into it and kind of delves into that part really well. I think the other thing this movie does a little bit better than, say, Falcon and Winter Soldier. So, Falcon and Winter Soldier talked about, mental health issues because, of course, what Sebastian Stan's character went with, which, I mean, what he went through, right, would create probably some of the highest levels of PTSD that you can imagine. And the thing is at the very end, he quits his therapy because he made amends with all the people that he had hurt as the Winter Soldier. That's kind of not how PTSD works, right? You don't really just be done with it that quickly. In fact, it could be years. You may never you may never be able to stop therapy, especially with the kind of damage that he would have gone through. So to suddenly just be like, oh, I'm cured because of this, it's not really how that works. And this movie didn't really do that. It didn't really do the, okay, I'm cured kind of thing. Which I think was a good approach there. That it's a work in progress. It's ongoing. It's something that you have to keep working on. And again, Yelena Belova's character also would have gone through a lot of trauma, and it's not something that just one movie where she helps save a guy would be enough to do that. But I think it was good that they did that. But then at the same time said, okay, you know what? We really like Florence Pugh's character. Let's kind of let her be the lead here and lead this kind of ragtag group of heroes here. And again, the fact that they make them the Avengers, again, that kind of separates it from the Suicide Squad. It's not the Suicide Squad, right? It's something different here. Unless I didn't see the second Suicide Squad movie, so I don't know if they made them the Justice League at the end of that movie, but I don't think so. Again, the other thing that makes this not the Suicide Squad is the fact that this would be like if Amanda Waller was trying to kill everybody instead of make them go on a mission. That's not how it worked here. So, yeah, I mean, the other thing, I really like Lewis Pullman's character. He brings like a Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off to it that it really worked for me. The idea of Cameron from Ferris Bueller's Day Off getting superpowers, it's a beautiful idea. I think it's perfect. And I don't know if he went into it saying, who can I be, right? If I'm going to do this movie, what would my inspiration be? I'm hoping that's what it was. I'm hoping that he said, yeah, I just looked at, Alan Ruck and Ferris Bueller's Day Off and said, yeah, I want to do Cameron. I mean, I wish they'd let him wear a Detroit Red Wings jersey. That would have been even better. I think what I found out was that I think John Hughes was a Red Wings fan, and that's why he wore that jersey, or somebody in the movie, because you think because the movie took place in Chicago, he'd be wearing a Blackhawks jersey, just like what's his face, Griswold, right? in from Chevy Chase in National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. I heard that Griswold jersey, I don't know if it still is, but for a while that was like the highest selling Chicago Blackhawks jersey. Everybody wanted to get the Griswold one, but anyway, that idea of Cameron, I mean, because that character of Cameron, he's when you watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off, it's like, yeah, Ferris Bueller's kind of fun, but Cameron is the one that people identify with. Cameron's the one that your heart goes out to. He's the one that you want, to get help. And in a way, right, when you've got Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character, she's almost like Ferris, right? When she's manipulating him, though. He's a little bit less sinister than she is, right? Like she's really going for it, but he's still very manipulative, right? When it comes to Cameron, he does a lot. I mean, stealing his dad's car when he's like so afraid of using the car, all those kinds of things. You get that dynamic there. And then with Yelena Belova, with Florence Pugh's character, she's almost like Mia Sara, right? She's almost the Sloane character. And the idea that like, oh, Cameron, and it's not like they don't hook up romantically. They don't get to be together. But that idea that like, if Yelena Belova, if she wasn't, if Sloane wasn't with Ferris Bueller, if they were just friends and she, sort of takes a shine to Cameron. I think she always had a soft spot for Cameron based on when you watch the movie. That idea, I thought watching that play out was really cool. So again, that's maybe me taking something of my own background, my own past to the movie and finding something that I liked in it that who knows if they even intended for that to be there. So I think that's one reason why I could understand if people weren't as big of fans of the movie, is that, I was taking all these other pieces, whether it was the mental health aspect or the fact that, Lewis Pullman reminded me so much of Cameron, that I really like that aspect of it there. I think the thing that surprised me, I think, was that everybody, for the most part, so many people like this movie. So when I saw the movie, like I said, there's about 10 to 15 people for a 9:30 a.m. matinee, which that's more full than you'd think. Like, again, I go to these matinees a lot, and I don't usually see that many people there at these early morning matinees. So for it to be that many people, and nobody was leaving the theater not liking the movie. Like, everybody was into it. Everybody seemed to enjoy it. And then it was like one of those things like, okay, well, let me see what it's like on Letterboxd. I kind of had a feeling like, oh, if I go on Letterboxd, there's going to be a lot of, ones and twos maybe as much as there's going to be threes and fours. Because when I think of some of my favorite Marvel movies, there's definitely, ones and twos for those movies. There's people that just don't like them. And I totally get it, because I didn't like The Dark Knight. I didn't like, that which I think a lot of people universally, but a lot of people have that as like their favorite or like top 3 comic book movie ever. And I wasn't a fan of it. I didn't work for me. So I get it that, not everybody's going to like something, but I was surprised how many people really dug this. And so I think there's a sense, for me at least, I think with Marvel movies, that they don't all have to be these like $250 million hit it out of the park, $1 billion earners. That you just go back to just making good things. Now I haven't seen Brave New World yet, but I feel like part of the problem with that one is that they made a lot of edits to it. Like the thing with this movie, they didn't do any reshoots. I don't think with this movie. I think the end scene, that post credit scene, they shot that one. I think like right before, like a month ago or something like that. So that one was shot relatively recently. But I think everything else in the movie was pretty much shot. Like the script was rewritten a little bit, but the movie itself, they weren't doing reshoots on, as far as I know. I think that helps when you have sort of a cohesive vision of what the film is supposed to be, and you just kind of, put it together and present it and give it to everybody. I think it, the reshoots idea, it feels like for me, like if I'm cooking something and I put too much salt in it, and then I try to put something else in, to try to counteract the salt. And what I've done is I've just kind of just put something else in that doesn't belong either, and the salt is still there and it doesn't belong there. It's like, I don't know, it's it's like I guess like if you get a bad tattoo, which I don't have any tattoos, but I guess if you get a bad one, you try to have somebody tattoo something over it, right? It's just maybe you just got to go with the laser and just take the whole thing off and just say the hell with it, and maybe that's the idea. Is you just got to just not do it, just I don't know, just scrap it and do something else maybe. But I can understand too, if you put like a couple $100 million into something, it's hard to say like, let's just scrap it. Let's at least get it out there so we can get anything back for it. So I think, maybe the $400 million that Brave New World got was just something that they could get back. So, but again, this one looks like it's going to be a success. It did about the same maybe the first weekend as Brave New World. I think it did a little bit better. Just critics wise, right? If you look at the critic scores, Brave New World, I think, was the first one that got like a C minus for the MCU movies, for the the fan score, and then with the critic score, I think it was like an A minus, Rotten Tomatoes, which that's pretty high for a Marvel movie as well. So this one is really well received by the critics as well, and people are enjoying it too. So I think. Yes, if I was going to look at the flaws, I think again killing off Taskmaster. I think again I just wanted to see. I wish I could have seen her become more of the Antonia Masters that I wanted her to be. And I don't know, maybe they'll come back and do something, or maybe they're just going to think that Taskmaster is a waste of time and they don't really need to do anything. And either way, I think that's kind of a waste. But I get it. So that's probably the one thing. But I think the fact that they said, okay, I think we can center a movie around Florence Pugh. I think she can lead a movie, she can star in a film, and she can lead this cast. Putting their faith in that and going with it, and her just hitting it out of the park was. I don't know. It was really great to see that. It was really great to see them do that. Yes, it is also an ensemble cast, and I guess it makes it a little bit different as opposed to like a Captain Marvel or Black Widow, which Black Widow ends up feeling kind of more like an ensemble too. But this is definitely more of an ensemble, right? Because this is like. There's all characters from different movies that are all kind of putting together into this thing. But she's the leader of it. She's the head. She's the one. I think when they with the Avengers themselves, I think they say Bucky's the leader of it, which kind of makes sense too that he would be the leader. But the movie is centered around her, and I thought it was really cool to see that happen, to see her be that good in this movie and have it work because of how good of a job she does. David Harbour, I think with the humor of Red Guardian, it works sometimes. Sometimes it's too much and you're like, I don't know what to do with this. There were definitely laugh out loud moments, partially with him, partially with the interactions between him and Florence Pugh. But there are points where you're kind of like, okay, I get it. He's this goofy Russian guy who's kind of all over the place. Sometimes it can be a bit much. It's sort of like the joke kind of runs cold. There's a post-credit scene where he's bothering a woman at the grocery store because of there's a Wheaties box. Though the one thing I liked about that was they played "Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now" by Starship in the background, which that 80s Starship period. I kind of like Sarah, but I think also because I'm a little bit younger when that stuff came out. But even I'm like, man, we built this city on rock and roll, or I don't know. I do have a soft spot in my part though, where Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now. I don't know. That was, but I think it's because I was younger when those songs came out. I think for older people, like that song, those songs were on the radio so much. Like I don't like my wife, for example. She's not a fan of that Starship period because it was just on the radio a lot. But you think about me, I was like 5 or 6 for that period. So it's like in the back seat and like my parents' car, the car seat. You remember the car seats back then? They were not like these big monstrosities that take like a PhD or like a Boy Scout knot tying badge or whatever to be able to install them into the back of the car. But back then it was like just like a kind of a booster seat that you could put a strap over the top. That was a car seat back then. But I can remember like sitting there and hearing songs like that. And I think, as a kid, if you hear Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now twice in an hour, it's not so bad at 6 years old. But I imagine at 14, you'd be like, this is ridiculous. What is Grace Slick doing? This is horrible. Change it to something else. I want to listen to The Cure or Depeche Mode or something like that. But so, and I guess, if you're older and you see that scene, you're probably going to cringe when you hear Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now. But for me, I was kind of into it. I was digging it. I was kind of singing along while I was playing in the background. But I think that David Harbour humor, it can kind of go either way, right? It can be, good, it can be bad. But the thing is about David Harbour's humor is that he can turn it off for the dramatic scenes with Florence Pugh's character. And so when the two of them are acting opposite each other, they have great comedic back and forth. But then when it needs to be dramatic, they can really do the dramatic piece as well. And the fact that they're navigating such a complicated relationship, and again, that's one of the things I would say about the Marvel homework, is that you need to see Black Widow to kind of see what their relationship is like. But those are some of the most touching moments of the film. It's the interactions between those two. There's one sequence where they're kind of standing alone on the street in New York, and he says, she's like, you never talked to me. It was over a year. You didn't talk to me for over a year. And he's like, I didn't think you wanted me to talk to you. And she just goes, I did. That's it. I did, and it was like, but that like just that simple I did was like really powerful. It wasn't a whole bunch of other stuff into it. It was just I did, and I think I think that's what we came to Marvel for. I think it's what we liked about Marvel earlier on was that you could make a movie like, for example, Captain America: First Avenger, that was this period action piece that had all of these moments to it, but then it could also have these other more poignant moments, these moments that kind of make you feel something or think something about the characters. It was the opposite of what Martin Scorsese said Marvel movies were, right? Because he said, well, Marvel movies aren't about humans; they aren't about people growing or their stories or what going through things or dealing with things. It's just all about fluff and big special effects and all of that. And I think early on Marvel movies weren't that. They were about people dealing with things and growing and interacting with their loved ones. And I think it's what people gravitated to Iron Man so much, right? Was that on the outside he was this big robot character. On the inside, there's a person inside the robot. It was Robert Downey Jr.'s character, and he brought so much to that character. There was so much. I think some of his own personal demons. He kind of inserted them into that character, and it made it really compelling, and people wanted to see it. And granted, he's also Robert Downey Jr. is really cool as well. But Chris Evans, he did the same thing, and Chadwick Boseman, he kind of brings that with his Black Panther, and I think one of the things maybe that was missing from recent Marvel entries was that struggle and that sort of that character development and people going through things and coming out on the other side, and so to kind of come back to that, almost like Marvel coming back to their roots with this movie. I mean, this movie feels like it could be a Phase 1 or Phase 2 movie more than what it is now, Phase 5, Phase 6, whatever, wherever we're at now. I think it's like the last movie for Phase 5. I think that's what this is. And I think that's maybe why it's resonated with so many people, that they looked at this and said, okay, Marvel's back where it was before. They kind of went back to their roots and they made something just really solid here. I also like, too, the twist where we say, oh, hey, guess what? This is an Avengers movie, right? This is the new Avengers, because the Phase 4 didn't end with an Avengers movie, and people didn't really know where Phase 4 ended and Phase 5 began. It didn't really, they kind of just blended into each other, and people didn't really know where any of it was going. They don't know what the target is or what the goals are. And now suddenly we've got targets now. We've got direction here, right? We know, okay, we're going to do this movie. We're going to do Fantastic Four. Next year is going to be one Avengers movie. The year after is going to be the other Avengers movie. We're going to have a Spider-Man movie in between those two. People now get it. They say, okay, this is how this is all going to work. And so I think that's the other piece of it, is it felt kind of rudderless for a couple of years. And you get these moments, right? You get these blips. You get like, Spider-Man No Way Home, or you get Deadpool and Wolverine. But overall, people weren't connecting with the movies as much. This is a movie that people can connect to, I think. I think it's a big, and maybe that's why people are seeing the 3 and 4 stars, why so many people are enjoying it, because there's something for them to connect to in it. And again, not everybody's going to connect to it, and that's okay. I think that's fine too. But I think for me in particular, there's a lot in this that I resonated with, and I really liked it. And so I hope for other people listening that, that if you, if you saw it, that you're sort of agreeing with me on these things, or you're being like, oh, Matt, you forgot to talk about this, you forgot to talk about that. I don't know. I really enjoyed this movie, and I kind of wanted to just get out there and do a quick post on it. It ended up not being quick. It's over an hour, which I guess is what happens with me. I always talk for a long period of time. But, if you listened to all of this and you haven't seen the movie yet, sucks because I spoiled the whole thing for you, but I hope you still watch it anyway. I don't know. For me personally, I don't listen to podcasts about movies that I haven't seen yet. So, for example, the PM podcast, I haven't done the Intent to Kill episode yet because I'm planning to watch that. I know the guys in Bulletproof, they do a lot of really great podcast episodes, but sometimes they do them about movies that I haven't seen yet. And it's like, I'm going to wait till I see that movie and then I'll listen to the podcast. And so sometimes I'll go back, however many episodes and do it. So, they download them all, right? They're always downloaded to my phone. I listen to them later. So I hope people took my advice on this one and you bailed before this part. You went and saw the movie. You're coming back here now, and hopefully you're like, yeah, Matt, I like the movie too. But if you didn't, you didn't. I understand that too. That happens as well. But yeah, why don't we wrap this up here? So, again, my novel, Nadia and Aiden, hopefully you heard the ad earlier. And before you even got in here, you clicked on the link and you bought a copy of it, because I would always appreciate if you do that. But yeah, that's, you can find my book there. And then, the site, dtvconnoisseur.blogspot.com, that's where you can find all my reviews. And then the podcast, of course, that's on all major podcatchers. So whatever you're listening to this on, hit the subscribe button. You can also go to the, wherever wherever you get your podcast from. You can rate and review us as well. Review could be just as short as "I like this podcast," and you'd be surprised that if you do 5 stars and "I like this podcast," what that does for a podcast in the algorithm. It can boost that podcast's visibility quite a bit. So, I'd rather you buy my book, but if you don't feel like spending money on buying my book, that's a good way you can support the podcast. It's just, I like this podcast, 5 stars on whatever podcatcher you use. But anyway, thank you all for listening. And we'll be back soon with another DTVC podcast episode. And who knows when we'll be back with the DTVC Extra, but hopefully soon for that as well. Thank you for listening. Bye, everyone.